Happy Sunday. You went to church today. You read the word. In most cases, it's called the written word. And in some serious theological gathering, they say the written word is greater than any other things on earth. This is an episode of What They Replace. I want to talk about the weaponized word, or the word they weaponized. There is a man in my family. He is old now, firstborn of his lineage. In the tradition we come from, that is not a small thing. The firstborn carries the name forward. The firstborn is the bridge between what the ancestors built and what the children will inherit. The man has not been home in years. Not because the road is so far. Not because the village has nothing left. The house is still there. The family is still there. The altars are still there. He does not go because somewhere between his father's world and his own, someone put a word in his mouth. And that word became a cage around everything his father was. The word was voodoo. I want to talk to you today about what that word really is, where it came from, what it replaced, and what it has cost us. Not in history books, but in living rooms, in family compounds, in the hesitation of a father who could go home to his ancestors without shame. Part 1. Before word was a weapon, or before words became a weapon. Before we talk about what they did with words, we have to understand what words were. In the village where my grandfather lived, and I have said this before, but I will say it again, because it is the root of everything. A man was expected to be a man of few words. In Benin, we say, not because silence meant weakness, because silence meant measurement. In an oral culture, a word before writing, before text, before the printed pages, the word of a man was his greatest currency, and his life was the collateral. When a man spoke, he was not just conveying information, he was committing. His words and his person were the same thing. If he said it, he staked his existence on it. That is why the others would say, the word of your mouth may build you or destroy you. They were not speaking poetically. They were speaking literally. This is what scholars now call a primary oral culture. A world where knowledge lives in people, not in pages. Where wisdom is carried in proverbs, compressed, portable, tested across generations. Where the spoken word is not a symbol of something. It is something. An event, a binding force. Walter Onag, one of the foremost scholars of oral culture, described it this way: that in oral society, the spoken words is a happening. It engages the whole person. It cannot be taken back, rewound, or revised. It exists in time, and time closes around it. This is why men spoke carefully. This is why silence was respected. Not because these people had nothing to say, but because when they spoke, they meant it with their lives. Part 2. The technology that changed everything. Then came writing. I hope you know writing is also a technology. The first writing system the world ever produced appeared in ancient Sumer, the civilization that occupied what is now southern Iraq, around 3300 BCE. Here's what they wrote first. Not poetry, not philosophy, not prayers, tax record, grain inventory, land ownership, claims, debts lists, royal decrees. Samuel Noah Kramer, the 20th century's leading scholar of Sumerian civilization, spent his life translating these tablets. And his conclusion was sobering. The written word was not born to record truth. I want you to hear that again. That's where I'm going. The written word was not born to record truth. It was born to record control. Think about what writing actually does. It separates the word from the man who spoke it. Before writing, your word traveled only as far as your presence. With writing, a command could travel to a village you would never visit, to a generation that would never meet you, and it would arrive with the full authority of text. The clay tablets does not explain itself. It does not answer questions. It simply declares. Arnaud identified this as one of writing's most profound effects. It restructures consciousness. Hear that again. It restructures consciousness. In an oral world, truth is tested in conversation, in relationship, in the back and forth of living people. In a literate world, truth is whatever is written. The pages becomes the authority. The man behind the page becomes invisible. And if you control what is written, you control what is true. This is not ancient history. This is the architecture of every propaganda system that has ever existed. This is the foundation the colonial project was built on. Part 3. The first conquest was always the name. Before they sailed the ships, they sharpened the words. When European colonial powers moved across Africa, they did not arrive in a vacuum of meaning. The people they encountered had names for themselves, names for their land, names for their God, names for their practices. These names were not random sound. They were definitions. They told a people who they were, what they valued, what they stood inside of. The colonizer understood something, not because they were more intelligent, but because they were more sinister in their intelligence. The intent determined the strategy, and their intent was not to understand. It was to replace. So, the first act of conquest was not the gun. It was the name. Look at Nigeria, for example. The name Nigeria is alien to Nigerians. It was coined in 1897 by Flora Shaw, the fiancée of Lord Lugard, the British colonial administrator who would later amalgamate the northern and southern protectorates. Niger, the river area, the region. Nigeria. A geographical label for a colonial administrative unit. It says nothing about the people. It says everything about who was doing the naming. Most African nations that won independence changed their names. Gold Coast became Ghana, restoring an ancient empire identity. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. Dahomey became Benin. The name was always understood as the first sovereignty. To name yourself is to define yourself. To allow another to name you is to accept their definition of you as your identity. Nigeria kept the colonial name. That silence has consequences. But the naming did not stop at geography. It reached into the sacred. Part 4. What they called Voodoo. The word Voodoo comes from the Fon and Ewe people of West Africa, present-day Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria. In its original meaning, Vodum means spirit. More specifically, it refers to the invisible forces that animate the visible world, the divine energy present in nature, in ancestors, in the relationship between the living and those who have gone before. It is not a religion of fear. It is a religion of relationship. When the enslaved people of West Africa were carried across the Atlantic, they carried Vodum with them. It survived in Haiti, in Brazil, in Cuba, in New Orleans, transformed by diaspora, but alive in its essence. In Haiti, it was Voodoo. In Brazil, Candomblé. In Cuba, Lucumí. Different names, same root. The belief that the world is inhabited by spirits and that the living have responsibility to both the seen and the unseen. The missionaries arrived and saw the ceremony. They saw the gathering, the drumming, the offering, the animal sacrifice, the movement, the trance, the communication with ancestors, and they made a decision, not a theological decision, but a strategic one. They did not attempt to understand what they were saying. They pointed at the most visible, most unfamiliar element, the sacrifice, the trance, stripped it of its context, stripped it of its meaning, translated it through the lens of fear, and gave it a name designed to detonate in the listener's mind before anyone could explain what it actually was. Voodoo, said with a sneer, written into mission reports, repeated in colonial literature, absorbed into popular culture, embedded in Hollywood films, the zombies, the doll, the curse, the dark ritual, generation of images stacked on top of each other until the word itself became a weapon. And here is how you know it worked. Today, at the mere mention of the word, a person stopped listening. Their mind is already made up. They do not want to know what comes next. The word detonates before the sentence finishes. That is not a reaction. That is a program. Part 5. What the ceremony actually is. Let me tell you what I told my father. In our tradition, when the family comes together at the compound, when they gather at the place of the ancestors, there is a ceremony. There may be a goat. There may be a fowl. There is food prepared. There is drink shared. There are prayers spoken. There is an iron, Ogun, the deity of iron, of labor, of the earth. A missionary looked at that scene and wrote, Voodoo, ritual, animal sacrifice, fetish worship. But let me tell you what is actually happening. The family is gathering. People who have spread across distance, towns, cities, other countries are coming home. They are not coming to stare at each other across a room. They are coming to eat together, to cook together, to sit together, to speak of problems, to speak of progress, to plan, to reconcile, to look each other in the eye and remember that they are all family. The animal sacrifice is not the point. It is the provision. You bring what you have, a goat, a fowl, so that when your people gather, there is enough to eat. The slaughter at the altar is the preparation of the feast. What they call a voodoo ritual is a love feast. What they demonize as fetish worship is a family council. What they label as barbarism is the same human impulse that makes people gather in a church service, that makes families sit at a table on a Sunday, that makes a community come together and break bread. The difference is that in our tradition, the ancestors are invited to the table too. The family does not end at death. The relationship continues. The responsibilities continues. The love continues. They pointed at the goats and shouted, witchcraft. They hid the love feast behind the word. Now, what they replace with voodoo. Now, let us be precise about what happened, because this was not accidental. This was a 3-step replacement. Step 1, replace the name. Take the word Vodum, which means spirit, relationship, the divine in nature, and replace it with voodoo. Load the new world with fear, with darkness, with everything the Western imagination associated with savagery. Make the word itself do the work of condemnation so that no explanation is ever necessary. Step 2, replace the book. Arrive with the Bible, not as a companion to what already existed, as a replacement. Tell the people that their ancestors knew nothing, that the centuries of relationship with the divine that preceded the missionaries' arrival were darkness, error, the work of the devil. Offer the written text as the only legitimate authority. And since the written text belongs to you, since you control what is printed, what is translated, what is distributed, you control what God says. The Bible in the hand of the colonial project was not offered as liberation. It was deployed as the most sophisticated writing technology ever used for cultural replacement. It carried the full weight of honor described, the authority of the page, the invisibility of the man behind it, the restructuring of consciousness in people who had previously known God through relationship, through nature, through the gathered family. Step 3, replace the fear. Once the name is poisoned and the book is installed, the final step is to make the people afraid of themselves. Make the first son hesitate before going home. Make the daughter feel shame when she participated in the gathering. Make the grandchildren mock what the grandfather knew. Make self-abandonment feel like progress and call it civilization. This is the replacement chain. a word, a book, a fear. And 3 generations later, a firstborn son is ashamed to go back to its roots. Part 7, the reclamation. Am I asking you to go back? History does not move backward. And I am not romantic about the past in a way that is useful to no one. What I am asking is simpler and more difficult at the same time. I am asking you to find the meaning inside the practice. When you see a family gathered at a compound, eating together, speaking of the ones who have gone before, do not look at the surface. Look at the intent. The intent is love. The intent is continuity. The intent is the refusal to let a family dissolve into strangers just because the city swallowed the village. When you hear the word Vodum, do not let the reaction that was programmed into you run before you can think. Ask, who gave me this reaction? When? For what purpose? And what was I prevented from knowing? When you look at your father's hesitation, do not call it superstition. Call it what it is, a man who was taught to be ashamed of his own home. And ask yourself, who benefited from that shame? The colonial project is not finished when the troop leaves. It is finished when you do its work for it. When you look at your grandfather's altar and call it voodoo. When you call the love feast a ritual. When you call the family council a dark ceremony. When you call the gathering of the living and the ancestors barbarism. That is the final stage of replacement. When the replaced does not know they have been replaced. But let's take a look at the structural contrast between church gathering and the voodoo gathering, which is the family gathering. Church gathering, wealth flows inward towards one man or one institution. The poor come, the struggle come, the broken comes, and they give. The pastor interprets God. Nobody questions the interpretation. The congregation does not solve each other's problem. They found one man's platform. It is extraction dressed as worship. In the voodoo gathering, wealth flows outward toward whoever needs it. The family comes. They bring what they have, not to give to one man, but to share among themselves. If someone is struggling, the gathering addresses it. If there is conflict, the gathering resolves it. If there is a decision to make, the gathering makes it together. The family is both the congregation and the pastor. There is no single interpreter. There is collective discernment. One is a corporation disguised as a community. The other is a community disguised as a corporation and renamed Voodoo, so you would be too afraid to attend. Now, let me tell you what the church does structurally. It takes a gathered people and redirects their energy upward toward one man, one book, one interpretation. It is the scattering of Babel completed indoors. You are in the same room, but you are no longer together. You are an audience. My grandfather was a healer, a hunter, an Ifa practitioner. He knew things that no university teaches. He knew the names of plants and what they carried. He knew how to read the world the way other men read books and pages. He knew that the living and the dead are not separated, by as much as we have been told. He did not need a missionary to tell him that the world is inhabited by the divine. He already knew. His people had always known. What the colonial project replaced was not ignorance with knowledge. It replaced one knowledge with another and called the first one darkness so that you would not mourn the loss. I am asking you to mourn it and then to go looking for what is still there. Because some things survive the replacement. The family compound is still there. The altar is still there. And the firstborn son can still find his way home. Vodum was the love feast of the family, where love actually reigned. What you have today as gathering, you can imagine everything that happens in there. If you have been a member of one for so long, I don't need to tell you. Go back to your roots. Go and make amends. That is where love truly reigns. My name is Inye. And on this episode of What They Replaced, I hope you understand now what Vodum means. It is not voodoo, it is Vodum. It is a love feast of the family and of the community. Do well to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In case this page disappears, we can still find each other. I'll place the link in the first comment. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.